let's jump in. I'm excited today again. Pastor Kojo, man, just helped us last week, and I just want to continue in this space of dealing with boundaries. I'm excited. Don't forget, those of you online, if you are in the Peoria area, we're all going to be in the house next Sunday. So everybody who's in Central Illinois, we're going to be in the house together for first Sunday in August. So just want to encourage you in that space, remind you of that. As we continue, we're going to continue in this space of boundaries today. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39. And I feel like as I've been listening to some of the feedback regarding the series so far and the messages and the focus on boundaries thus far, I feel like I need to begin this sermon with kind of a warning announcement, right? Just as oftentimes with household items, you have warning, right, where they may warn you, hey, this is harmful if swallowed, or make sure that when you utilize this, it's in a well-ventilated area, right, or, small things. If you have a power tool, keep your hands away from the saw, simple things where there's a warning because they understand there is a need for caution. So as we begin today, I want to issue a warning that boundaries are essential for our well-being, but they're not always welcomed by others. Warning. You setting boundaries are essential for your well-being, but they are not always welcomed by others. See, what we'll find as we look at Genesis chapter 39 is that you can set a boundary and you will have an unexpected response from somebody else. It's as though it was a triggered response for them, where you didn't expect resistance from them, but you received it. You didn't expect hostility from them, but you received it. Sometimes you setting boundaries for you to be the best you can be for the glory of God, the best you can be for the people in your life, will somehow cause other people to become frustrated, potentially angry, potentially hostile, right? So I just want to issue a warning, because as we look at Genesis chapter 39, here's what we're going to see. We're going to see that Joseph sets boundaries, and then there is a reaction to those boundaries, and we want to pay attention to how he responds to the reaction. So again, some of you within family dynamics, you're going to set some boundaries, and your family members are not going to understand, because it seems like you changing all of a sudden. That's the whole goal of life, isn't it? For us to grow and change, to be transformed, to be better, right? But your better is not better for them. And when your better is not better for them, they have a problem with you getting better. Am I talking to anybody in the room? All right? So as we look at boundaries, Genesis chapter 39, what I heard from a couple of weeks ago in reading Genesis 3 was a number of people saying, man, I'm glad you read that, because I had never heard that story, right? So I don't want to assume that you know the story. So I want to read a lot of scripture, Genesis 39, verses 1 through 21. And then I want to give some background, because I don't want to assume you know the background of the story and how Joseph plays a part in God's larger story. And then we'll jump into what we're going to talk about. So Genesis 39, beginning at verse 1. Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned, in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. No one in his house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do this immense evil, and how could I sin against God?" Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now one day, he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment with her and had run outside, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "my husband brought a Hebrew man to make fools of us. He came to me so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could. When he heard me screaming for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside. She put Joseph's garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story. 'The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me, but when I screamed for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside.' When his master heard the story, his wife told him, 'These are the things your slave did to me.' He was furious and had him thrown into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden." Wow. Anybody want to say, wow? What a story. So let's get some context to see how it comes together biblically before we look at the section we want to focus in. Some of you have heard maybe people reference, or as you come across scripture, you've heard a reference of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Anybody heard that? God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, here's that reference. The God of Abraham, God selects one man, and from that one man, he makes a promise, a covenant, an agreement that he's going to cause that one man to have a great nation, that from his seed, Abraham, Isaac is the seed, from that seed will come a great nation, and that nation will bless other nations. So Abraham is the one who receives the covenant promise. Isaac is the seed, right? From Isaac, sons are born, Esau and Jacob. Jacob is the younger son, and as the younger son, he carries the promise with him. It is Jacob who has 12 sons. Those become the 12 tribes of Israel, and Joseph is the 11th of Jacob's 12 sons. Are you still tracking with me? All right, so just wanted to give you background. So this is how it fits into the larger story. So we're talking about the initial beginnings of the nation of Israel and Joseph and his role as a part of God's plan with the nation of Israel. So here's other backstory. Joseph, as the 11th son, was loved by his father but hated by his brothers. Because he was loved by his father but hated by his brothers, his father gave him a special coat, a coat of many colors to highlight how much he loved him. His brothers hated him because his father loved him. They hated the fact that he got a coat. So one day when they saw him coming to check on them, they decided, hey, why don't we kill our brother Joseph? Talk about family dysfunction, right? Why don't we just take him out, right? So they decide they're going to take him out. They put him in a little hole in the ground for a while. And then they later decide, based on some persuasion, okay, we'll just sell him into slavery instead of killing him. And we'll tell our dad that he's dead. So that's what they did. They sold him into slavery. They told their dad that he was dead. Once they sold him into slavery, he ends up in Egypt. When he ends up in Egypt, chapter 39 tells us that he's bought by Potiphar. He becomes an attendant in Potiphar's house. In Potiphar's house, somehow Potiphar recognizes that the Lord is with Joseph. I don't know how he recognizes that the Lord is with Joseph, but it's evident to him that what he's seeing in the character and in the activity, in the life of Joseph is not just normal and ordinary. It's evident to him that what he is seeing is as a result of some supernatural being who is somehow with this person and working through him to accomplish some things in his life. Oh, that people could see that the Lord was with us. That we wouldn't have to announce that I am a child of God. We wouldn't have to announce that I know Jesus. But just when we show up, people would realize, oh, there's something special about you. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know there's something special with you. Oh, that people could see that the Lord was with us. So he noticed that the Lord was with him, so he started putting him in charge of things. And as he puts him in charge of things, man, the Lord blesses the things that he's in charge of. So he puts him in charge of more things. So the Lord blesses the things that he's in charge of. He puts him in charge of everything. And then he comes to a point where there's nothing that Joseph is not in charge of except for what his master eats. That's where we open up in Genesis chapter 39. Right? And then we're getting ready to see a turn. Things are going well, but we're getting ready to see a turn. God is blessing. The favor of God is resting upon Joseph's life after being betrayed by his brother, sold into slavery. He finally now is in a place of the grace and the favor of God, and he has a place and position and status, and he's influencing things for the glory of God. All the work that he's doing, everybody knows that somehow God is the one who's causing this to happen. So Joseph is living a life to please God, and then things start to change. Warning, I just want to let somebody know that sometimes when you're in the midst of your greatest blessings, that's when you encounter your greatest attack. Right? Sometimes when they say, oh man, God, I've been waiting on this. You brought things together. I finally got the job I want. God, I feel like I'm in the rhythm that I need to have. Seem like everything going right. Everybody know that I'm with you, man. I'm doing better than I've ever done before. It's trying to please you, God. Seem like things are going well. When you're experiencing your greatest blessings, oftentimes that's when you will also experience your greatest level of attack. So here's what happens. Joseph is experiencing blessing, and here's what's getting ready to happen. We're getting ready to see some attack. So verse 7 and 8, remember, after some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, sleep with me. But he refused. But he said to his master's wife, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. Here's the first point that I want to make as we talk about boundaries. Maybe it's a reminder for us. Boundaries are for you. I'll say it again. Boundaries are for you. We establish boundaries not for others. We establish boundaries for ourselves. We say to ourselves, here are the borders, the boundaries, the limits I need in my life in order for me to be the best that I can be for the glory of God, in order for me to be the best person I can be, in order for me to be the healthiest person, in order for me to operate in peace and for me to have my joy full. These are the boundaries that I need to put in place for me in order for me to be at my best. Boundaries are for us and not for other people, right? So we begin there knowing that boundaries are for us, and since boundaries are for us, then when we set our boundaries, we want to make sure that we set our boundaries based on our beliefs and our values. Because boundaries are for me. And because they are for me, then I want to set my boundaries based on my beliefs and my values, understanding that you may not believe what I believe and you may not value what I value, but these are my boundaries. And these boundaries that are for me are based on my beliefs and my values. So notice that Joseph set some very clear boundaries. His relationship with God is very clear to him that, man, he's not going to do anything to dishonor God. He has a clear boundary, obviously, that, man, he wants to be trustworthy. He wants to operate in integrity. He's set this boundary because that's what's important to him. He wants to be a person that can be counted on, a person that somebody can give their whole house to and know that everything's going to be just as it needs to be. He sets boundaries in his life based on his values, based on what he believes about faith, what he believes about family, what he believes about loyalty, what he believes about integrity, what he believes about self-control. He sets his boundaries based on his values and his beliefs. Can I ask, what are your values and beliefs? And based on your values and beliefs, have you set boundaries to align with your values and your beliefs? He set boundaries that are based on his values and beliefs, and they are clear boundaries. These boundaries serve as his moral compass that helps him to live the kind of life that he believes God wants him to live. So, for example, if we value honesty and integrity, then set boundaries in order for us to maintain that. If we value family time and making sure that we guard and protect that, then setting boundaries for that. If we value our health, then what are the boundaries that we're putting in place? Because we value our health and believe that it's important. If we value decency and respect, then what boundaries are we putting in place to make sure that we always operate within decency and respect, right? If we value honoring others, and what boundaries are we putting in place to make sure that we honor others? If we value our mental health, then what boundaries are we putting in place to make sure that our mental health can be in the best state that it can be? All that I'm trying to say is that Joseph established boundaries based on his beliefs, his values, because he understood the boundaries were for him. Here's the other thing I appreciate, not a point, but just an observation, that Joseph obviously has boundaries set before he has this encounter with Potiphar's wife. Set your boundaries before you need them, because you never know when you will need them. But if you already have them set, it's easy just to refer to them, right? So he has boundaries that are very clearly set. Right? And because he has boundaries that are very clearly set, he can refer to them. Again, my first point is boundaries are for who? You can say me. Boundaries are for who? Boundaries are for me. So here's something, if it catches you, just to drive that point home, then good. The boundaries we set, they start with me, guarding my soul, my mind, my sanity, protecting my values, my core, my vibe, keeping my spirit alive, no need to hide. It's about self-respect. My needs get met. Prioritizing my peace, no regrets. Honor what's real, what matters the most. Living authentically, that's my boast. Setting limits, keeping my life tight. Navigating struggles, staying in the fight. Empowered and resilient, I stand tall. Boundaries are for me, that's the call. So the first one is we set boundaries because boundaries are for us. Here's the second one. We heard it last week, and I just want to hit it quickly again and move on. Once we establish our boundaries, because boundaries are for me, now, Coach O reminded us you got to communicate your boundaries, right? So she comes trying to holler at him, right? She's like, you looking good, Joseph? You looking good, you looking good. I've been watching you doing your work, man. I've been watching you looking good, you looking real good, right? And she is not bashful about what she wants. She's very clear. She's very direct of what she wants from Joseph, right? She's very clear and very direct in her communication, right? And here's his response. Again, no one in the house is greater than me. My master has withheld nothing from me. And because he's withheld nothing from me, it wouldn't be right for me to do what you're asking. Why? Because even though you're acting like it doesn't matter to you, it matters to me that you're his wife. Right? Because I've set boundaries based on my values and my beliefs. It matters to me that you're his wife. So I don't want to do this evil thing against my master because I value that relationship. But I definitely don't want to do this thing and sin against my God because pleasing him is more important to me than anything else in the world. See, what Joseph does is Joseph communicates his boundaries that are anchored in his beliefs and his values. He says basically, doing what you ask of me would be an abuse or violation of trust. And I value being a trustworthy person. Doing what you ask of me would offend my master's role as your husband. And I value being a respectful person who honors others. Doing what you ask of me would be a sin against my God. And I value pleasing God more than I do even pleasing myself. So can I ask, how well are you doing communicating your values? Just for you to assess. So if you've laid up some boundaries for work-life balance, right? So maybe a boundary in work-life balance because of your values may be, you know what? I'm not checking emails after 6 because I want to ensure that I have quality time with my family. Or values related to personal integrity. I refuse to lie. And I refuse to participate in deceptive activities or go back on my promise. Right? So if you say, hey, because I respect relationships, you may set up a boundary that says, I will not tolerate disrespectful language or behavior from a friend, a family member, or a partner. Because that's my value system and those are my boundaries. Mental health, you may say, hey, I will avoid or limit my time on media, social media, or environments that negatively impact my mental health. All right? So we communicate our values. And sometimes, and Joseph explained why, if necessary, if you decide to, you can communicate why. Okay? Now, here's what I want to get to, my third point, because this is the harder part of this whole piece right here. Thirdly, reinforce boundaries with behavior. Reinforce boundaries with behavior. You see, Joseph faced the relentless pursuit of Potiphar's wife. It seemed like every day. It seemed like as soon as that brother came around, like, hey, Joseph. I see you, right? He's like, man, right? I mean, it seemed like this is sexual harassment, right? That's what this is. This is sexual harassment in the workplace, right? That's what's going on here. Right? He probably just trying to go to work. He just trying to make a living. He just trying to do his thing. He ain't come here for all that. Right? But she's pursuing him day after 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 day. So here's what he has to do. He has to reinforce the boundaries he communicated with his behavior. Now, why is that important? Because when I reinforce my boundaries with my behavior, it demonstrates my integrity, right? It shows that I want my words to line up with my actions, that the behavior I'm engaging in, I want it to align with what I communicated, I believe, and I value, right? So I want to reinforce my boundaries with my behavior because it builds respect. I know when you heard me say that these were my boundaries, you thought I was playing. Obviously, that's why you keep chasing me every day. Because you thought that sooner or later, I would just give in for whatever reason or another, right? But it builds respect. It helps you to respect the fact that I'm going to honor what I said even when you don't respect what I said to you, right? So again, reinforcing it with my behavior protects my well-being. I know why I set the boundaries. I set the boundaries because I want to be the best I can be for the glory of God. I set the boundaries because I want to be the best I can be for the people who are connected to me. And I realize that me violating those boundaries, maybe for a moment, may be pleasing, but I understand consequences, right? So I'm not going to violate it. Why? Because I want to protect my well-being, right? And then I want to make sure that I maintain my commitment as far as behavior to establish clear expectations that no matter what you say, how often you pursue me, I am not giving in. I'm going to maintain my boundaries, right? So here's the hard part for us with boundaries. We have to reinforce our boundaries with our what? With our actions, right? So my behavior backs up what I said is my boundary. So if work-life balance, again, if you set the boundary, I'm not going to check emails after 6. What's an appropriate behavior? I can't check email after 6 because if somebody log on and they send me an email and they see I checked the email, they're like, oh, they was just playing. They weren't serious. Right? Or if personal integrity, you value honesty and set boundaries against participating in gossip, right? When a conversation comes up and it turns to gossip, right? Then you have an opportunity, right? Either you steer the conversation away from that or you excuse yourself, Why? Because you set a boundary. I don't want to participate in this. I don't want to operate this way if it's respect for relationships, right? Then if you say, hey, I don't want anybody, family member, friend, partner, speaking disrespectfully, right? Then when somebody speaks respectfully, right, you got to communicate. Hey, remember, we talked about this? We talked about when we interact, here's how we're going to communicate with one another. And what you just did, what you just said was very disrespectful. So I just want to let you know that we're not going to communicate in that way. And if for some reason you're unable to communicate with me in the way that I need to be communicated, it's okay. I can excuse myself. Right? I'm not asking you to change. I'm saying I need you to respect me in order for me to stay with you. Right? Now that becomes a powerful lesson, right? Again, if it's mental health, making sure that we have the things in place to monitor small things that negatively impact our mental health, right? So if it's a boundary, hey, I got to keep my mental health right, then I need to make sure I have some things in place. So I may limit my time on social media. I may limit the kind of media I take in. I may limit the kind of people I interact with, right? Because I want to protect my mental health. Whatever it is, we reinforce our boundaries with our behavior. Can we be honest? For many of us, this is where we fall apart. Just wiggle your toe. You don't have to wave your hand. Right? Right? Just wiggle your toe, right? This is where we fall apart. We set boundaries, and we don't honor them with our behavior. Okay, if you want to have a conversation about it, just ask your kids. Right? They'll tell the truth. Like, you told me I couldn't, but then I wore you down. I won. Please know your kids are playing a game. I won. I know. Right? So we have to reinforce them with our behavior, and that becomes the hard part, right, of reinforcing with our behavior because it's based on our beliefs and our values, and boundaries are for us. So if you don't reinforce it, who's going to reinforce it for you? Right? Here's my last point, and then I'm done. And this is challenging as well. Set boundaries knowing you can't control how others respond to them. This is where we started, right? So what happens in Joseph's story? What happens in Joseph's story, Joseph set the boundaries. He reinforces the boundaries with his behavior. He's communicating again and again. And Mrs. Potiphar is not having it. So she catches him one day. Nobody's around. She goes into her thing, right? And Joseph like, man, this is not working, right? You are not giving me a break. I got to get out of here. So he runs to leave, and what happens? She catches a piece of his garment, right? Now this is foul. It's getting ready to get foul, right? She catches a piece of his garment, and here's what happens. She lies and flips the script. Because the script is she's pursuing. She's the one harassing, right? But she lies and flips the script, right? And now the script that she tells as a person in authority, right? The script that she tells is he was pursuing me, right? And we won't even get into the loaded language that she uses, right? Did you all see the loaded language, right? It was loaded language. This Hebrew that you brought in the house. Loaded language, right? That this was a slave from somewhere else. That's loaded language, right? You somehow thought you could trust him. You brought this person into our house. Not only is it loaded language, but then it's playing on the manipulation of blame, right? This is your fault, husband. Look at the setup, right? Use of authority, manipulation. This is your fault, husband. You brought this man into our home, and this is what happened to me as a result of your negligence, right? So, what happens? The husband, he's like, hey, man, you got to go to prison. You got to go. You got to go to prison, right? No questions, no dialogue, right? You got to go to prison. So what happens? Joseph goes to prison. Now, of course, the Bible doesn't give us everything, all the exchange of what happens, all of that. We don't know what the conversation was like. We don't know if Joseph tried to defend himself and his defense. We don't know any of that, right? We know the bottom line, Joseph was sent to prison. He was sent to prison for something he did not do, right? He was sent to prison because he wanted to maintain a boundary. Think about that. Had he given in to her request because of her position of authority, he would have been safer in the eyes of some. But in Joseph's mind, because pleasing God is more important than pleasing people, I'm going to trust my fate in the hands of God more than I am in yours. Right? So here's the point that I want to make in this space, that once we set boundaries knowing we can't control how others respond to them. So here's a sub point, and I think it's important for you to hear and for all of us to take in. How others respond to our boundaries reveals where they are. How other people respond to our boundaries reveals where they are, right? Joseph has very clear boundaries. Hey, I can't do this. Man, it's to be evil to my master, to be, sinful towards my God, right? It doesn't align with my beliefs and my values, right? That I set those boundaries for me based on my beliefs and my values, right? She obviously does not share his beliefs and his values. So the way that she responds to the boundary that he set is based on where she is, not where he is. Because she's in a different place. She don't care nothing about her husband. She's concerned about what she want when she want it, right? She is not concerned about his God. She's not thinking about that. She's thinking about what she wants and how she wants it, right? So her response to his boundary has nothing to do with him and everything to do with her. Please hear me. People's response to your boundaries have very little oftentimes to do with you, and it has everything to do with them. So if you establish a boundary, as we started off in the beginning, right, that is better for you but not best for them, then guess what happens? They get mad about your boundary, right? Your boundary communicates, hey, you know what? Man, I need some personal time. I can't do this or that, or I can't go hang out with you here anymore. You think you better than me? You think you better than me? Like, where'd it come from? No, I think I'm trying to live differently. That's it. That's all. Right? And you don't want, but I wasn't even thinking about you. Tell me, do I think I'm better than you? I wasn't thinking about you. I'm thinking about me and what's best for me. But people respond with anger and hostility because of where they are. Are you saying the way I'm living not right? I didn't say anything about your life. I said, here's what I need to do for me because of my beliefs and my values and how I believe God wants me to live. I ain't say anything about your life. I ain't say anything about your choices. I ain't say anything about what you're doing. I'm telling you what I need to do for me, right? So when people come out of a bag on you, right, when they flip on you, please understand, this is not about you. This is about them, right? Say, okay. I can tell that my boundary has done something on the inside of you. And I understand that. I realize that. I realize your reaction and your response is not about me. It's about what's going on with you. So I'll leave you with you. Because this is between you and you. That I want to leave you with you. So you and you can deal with what you got going on. All right? That becomes hard, man. All right? Now, here's why that's important. Because if we don't do that, we'll allow where they are to change where we are. Right? So don't allow where other people are. Don't allow the reactions of others to your boundaries to dictate your actions, right? So they responded, hey, this is something going on with you. I don't know what's going on with you, right? And depending on how you acting, right, you're acting in a certain way, and as you act in a certain way, the expectation is that your reaction to my boundary should cause me to adjust my boundary. And I'm saying to you, my boundary is my boundary regardless of your reaction, right? So I'm not going to shift my boundary because of your reaction. My boundary is my boundary. Now, if I decide that I need to adjust my boundary, then that'll be a decision that I make based on the counsel of God, based on me looking at his word. Then I'll make that decision. But I will not be influenced by where you are as it relates to my boundaries. So what does Joseph do? Joseph just resolves, you know what? It's all good. I got to go to prison. Okay. And he goes to prison. So let me just make a note that oftentimes in parent-child relationships, this becomes very hard. It becomes very hard to set boundaries. I remember Christy and I were married at 22, and I remember getting married at 22. And at 22, we started deciding these are the boundaries we want to set for our marriage, for our relationship. This is kind of how we want to live and how we wanted to live. I remember me and my dad, man, we were cool, but we saw things differently, right? And I remember me and my dad having some heated discussions about some boundaries that we set as to how we wanted to live, right? And it's like, hey, man, I get it, right? And, you know, I remember initially kind of the tension, like, yeah, but this is my dad, you know, I don't want to be disrespectful, you know, this is my dad, like, he raised me, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I remember kind of the pressure to kind of give in and be like, all right, well, you know, I'll do it the way you want me to do it when I'm around you, you know. I remember, right? I'm just being honest, right? I remember that pressure, right, of wanting to conform when I was with him, right, because I didn't want to disrespect him, all of that, right, you know, and I finally came to the point where I had to wrestle with, like, okay, these are my boundaries, right, and as hard as it was, came to a point where, like, okay, you know, Dad, I understand where you're coming from, I totally get it, you know, and I respect where you at, right, but, you know, as for me and my house, you know, this kind of how we gonna do it, right? Right? And I still remember, like, you know, like, okay, am I finna get a whooping? You know, it's like, right? I still remember feeling like that, like, am I finna get a whooping? You know, what's finna happen, right? I remember that kind of dynamic. All I'm trying to say is sometimes when you're dealing with boundaries as an adult child with your parents, it can be very awkward. And it can be very uncomfortable, right? And you have to work through so many of your childhood issues, right? To come to grips with the fact, you know what, man, I get it. But wait, I'm an adult who will be held accountable for my life, right? And the choices I make. So, this is tough to navigate, but God, will you give me grace to navigate this? So they understand it's not about being disrespectful. It's not about saying your way wasn't the right way. It's about saying, I feel led to do it a different way. And I just want you to respect and honor that. Does that make sense for anybody? All right? Okay. All right. So as we conclude, Joseph didn't let the false accusation make him compromise his values. We don't have any record where he accuses the woman, comes out of character. Joseph remains Joseph. He remains a person of character. He remains a person who is trustworthy, who is loyal. And even though it had negative consequences in his life, his unwavering commitment to his God, his beliefs, and his values, Joseph's stance is, I need to be able to live before God. As long as I can live before God and know that me and God are good, then I got to trust God to deal with all the stuff I can't control, right? And that becomes hard, right? It's like, okay, God, I'm going to trust you. You got me out here. You got me out here, God. Like, I'm going to trust you. I want to please you. I'm doing what you want me to do, God. But this is not turning out as I expected, right? It's like, I thought, you know, doing the way you want me to do and having boundaries of integrity and faithfulness and loyalty, I thought that would actually pay off in this cruel and crooked world. Sarcasm. Right? I thought it would actually pay off. And it's like, no, right? But doesn't it? See, Oftentimes, our commitment to trust God and to trust that he's in control and that pleasing him is the most important thing, oftentimes we evaluate the results of that decision too soon. We evaluate mid-game, but it really can't be evaluated until the end of the story. Right? Don't get caught up evaluating whether or not God is working all things together for good in the middle of the story. Keep living the story and trusting God and see how God pulled the pieces together. Can I fast forward the story? So fast forward the story. Joseph is in prison, but I read to you, but the Lord was with Joseph. Because when the Lord is with you, it doesn't matter whether you're in a palace or in a prison. Right? The Lord is with him. And as the Lord is with him, the Lord favors him in prison. So everything in prison is placed under his authority. Because everything in prison is placed under his authority, he gets to interact with some people who were from the king's court, right? Who were placed in prison. He interprets some dreams for them. One is killed. One lives, gets out, goes back to be with the king, right? Because the Lord is with him. So when the king of Egypt has a dream and he don't know what's going on, the guy remembers like, oh, there's this guy I met in prison named Joseph. He know how to interpret dreams. And he brings him before the king and he interprets the dreams like the Lord is trying to tell you this, right? 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, right? And the Lord's trying to prepare you for this. You need to get somebody who's going to be in charge of all that, right? And the king like, man, I'm going to put you in charge. Wait, I was just in charge of the prison. Yeah, but I'm going to put you in charge. So he goes from being in charge in the prison to second in command of all of Egypt. Right? All of Egypt. Right? And this is a setup from God. So the same guy that was in the pit, same God that was in Potiphar's house, it went to prison, is now in the palace, but it's a setup from God. Why? Because God knows famine is coming, and in order for God to preserve the nation of Israel, God has to have Joseph in place so the nation of Israel can come to Egypt, be in Goshen, be taken care of, have provision so they can be sustained as a people. Here's all I'm trying to say. Don't you evaluate whether or not God is doing his thing in your life too soon. You want to wait until the end of the story to say, God, I don't like it, but I'm going to trust you. God, I don't think this is what I expected, but I'm going to be faithful to you. Why? Because one thing I know, God, is you are going to work this out for your glory. God, you're going to work this out so you can get praise and you can get honor. So, God, I may not like it all the time, but I trust you enough to know that if I please you, it's going to be all good. It's going to be all good. And that's my encouragement. My encouragement to you today, brothers and sisters, online and in person, setting boundaries to live the kind of life that God wants you to live. Initially, man, you're going to catch all kind of flack. If you're trying to change and, man, I want to be better, and you want to live better, you want to be emotionally healthy, you want to be flipping off, you don't want to be cussing people out, you don't want to be acting foul, right? You don't want to be gossiping, lying, and cheating and all of that. You're trying to be better, and you start putting those things in place based on your beliefs and your values. Please know you're going to get attacked from all sides. But walking with God is the best walk you can ever take in your life. It's the best walk. It's the best walk. So my encouragement to you is to walk with him and to trust him and to trust that he's going to keep you. Does that make sense? All right. So here we go. Didn't plan on it, but let's go here because I want to encourage you. Old song they used to sing in the church. It's a hymn kind of long meter. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. They say that again. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me, walk with me while I'm on this tedious tedious journey. Tedious journey. I want Jesus. I want Jesus to walk with me.